Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Ted Earhart. In part one of our discussion on cryptocurrencies, we talked about some of the key benefits or features that the biggest proponents often cite when discussing this technology. In part two, we're going to talk about several of the big questions that I think really remain to be answered as we think about whether or not this technology will ultimately gain broad adoption and demonstrate staying power. So that's what we'll discuss. I'm going to do a part three as well, where we'll talk about some of the investment considerations. So stick around and let's get started. Now, one of the biggest questions is whether governments around the globe will ultimately regulate or even outright ban cryptocurrency. Remember, one of the key features of these systems is that they are totally decentralized. In other words, there is no central authority. There is no group of managers. Cryptocurrency only exists on the internet. So, in other words, if some bad actor is using cryptocurrency, whether it's for money laundering or some scam or any other criminal enterprise, there is no 1-800 number for law enforcement to call. Now, you might be trying to think about scenarios of where this would impact one. Well, the biggest one, of course, is these so-called ransomware attacks. This is where hackers effectively shut down major organizations by encrypting all their files and demanding a ransom for access to a key to unlock them. You know, in just the last month or so, we saw the largest pipeline operator in the United States shut down by a ransomware attack, and that was followed by another attack, a separate attack, on one of the largest meat processing companies in the United States. In both instances, hackers demanded a ransom, of course paid in cryptocurrency, because it's much more difficult for legal authorities or law enforcement to confiscate those funds or to identify who is actually receiving them. Although in one of the cases, law enforcement actually were able to get at least some of the funds back. It's kind of an interesting case, but beyond the scope of our discussion here today. So clearly, if something is being used to facilitate the shutdown of major infrastructure within a country or even threaten the food supply, I mean, it's obvious that policymakers are going to respond at some point. But this actually gets even bigger. I mean, in theory, some type of decentralized currency could actually threaten the stability of an entire country. And a good example of that recently is in Turkey, where they did actually ban cryptocurrency outright. The banking system in Turkey has been under a lot of strain in recent years, and money has been leaving the country. So basically, the technical term of this is capital flight, when all the money is trying to get out of a country. This, of course, can create major problems. I mean, basically, the way to think about this is if we think about it in the context of the U.S., just imagine all of a sudden one day everybody said, I don't want to own dollars. I want to put all my money in, Bitcoin or Mexican pesos or whatever the case may be. If everybody decides to sell dollars at the same time, what happens is it'll collapse the value of the currency. Basically, the banking system will go down. That'll create mass instability and obviously threaten the stability of the country and those in power. So it's quite unlikely that countries are simply going to just allow that to happen. And in fact, the Chinese are well known for so-called capital controls. They don't want all the money leaving the country. They've also really cracked the whip on cryptocurrencies in recent months, again, in an effort to kind of rein this in. But the other thing, there was a good article in the Wall Street Journal. I just wanted to mention this. This article pointed out that the U.S. has this unique status as the world's global reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, that is. And basically, without getting into the technicalities, what that means is most international transactions are conducted in U.S. dollars, and that gives the U.S. unique powers. You think about countries like Iran and North Korea, for instance. The U.S. is able to identify specific individuals, businesses, even entire countries, and effectively lock them out of the banking system. And that, of course, is a huge power as we try to influence the behaviors of these countries, of course, we're trying to negotiate nuclear issues and so forth. And my point is, it's clear to me that a country like the United States isn't going to simply just willy-nilly allow their domestic currency, which is the global reserve currency, to be debased or replaced, rather, might be the correct word, by some decentralized version of which it has no control over. I think it's stretched to say that a country, again, like the U.S., would just simply allow that to happen without putting up some roadblocks. So if you are a country that actually feels threatened or sees a threat via one of these decentralized currencies, outside of trying to ban cryptocurrency, what can you do? Well, the short answer is you can create your own, and that's exactly what the Chinese have done, as reported by the Wall Street Journal it's just back in April. And in fact, the same article mentioned that there were dozens of other countries working on this. About a week or two after that article was published, the chairman of the Federal Reserve did an interview with 60 Minutes and announced that the United States, the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve was working through these issues and kind of thinking about what the rollout of a digital dollar would look like. So my big question that's in my mind, especially if you're someone who really feels strongly about this concept, this technology, that it's really going to be widely adopted, what does it mean when the world's countries all digitize their own currencies? If these digital currencies have basically all the same benefits as what I'll call the private versions, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, what does that mean for broad-scale adoption of these private versions? And I think the short answer is no one knows. We got a long way to go in this. But if I were someone who was taking a big bet, this is something I'd want to be thinking very carefully about. So one of the most interesting things I heard came from actually both the founder of Ethereum and the founder of Coinbase, the cryptocurrency exchange. Both have made comments to the effect of they see these decentralized cryptocurrencies being supplemental to the current banking system. And I found that quite interesting because it's in stark contrast to some of these evangelists who, will make proclamations such as Bitcoin's about to take over the entire global financial system. To me, when you think about some of these more pragmatic and realistic problems that a modern society has to deal with, like this ransomware, for instance, or money laundering, tax reporting, it's pretty clear that there's going to be some type of controls or regulatory apparatus built around these things. I mean, these things exist for a reason. But this kind of muddies the water. It's like, well, what does that really mean for the future of these cryptocurrencies that exist today? And, furthermore, what happens, as we discussed, when countries like the U.S. create a digital dollar? If a digital dollar, from a user's perspective, has all the same features and benefits as Bitcoin or Ethereum, will those things demonstrate staying power? Well, I think those are questions that no one has the answer to today, and only time will tell. But it's certainly an intriguing question. So I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to do part 3 of this series, which will kind of get into some of the investment considerations, at least that I think about. And I think that'll be a pretty all-inclusive discussion on this subject. So as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.